Hello, and welcome to Cult Story Time. I'm Angel. I wanted to talk today about prophecy and how prophecy was used and introduced into the cult because it was something that they tried to say that made us like not a manipulative cult, because they were like, everybody in our cult uses prophecy, everyone has a personal line to the Lord, and everybody makes their own decisions. And then, of course, growing up in it and coming out of it and looking back, I'm like, yeah, like that's not how that went. But I wanted to talk about how they used it, because they used it a lot. And they used it to say that everybody was autonomous, and really what it ended up as was this like massive control element that controlled like almost every aspect of your life. So the cult leader, David Berg, he received prophecies throughout his cult career, we'll say. He received prophecies every time he got drunk. And he would hear from the Holy Ghost, he would hear from Jesus, and he would hear from God. And then later he only started hearing from Jesus. And he passed away. And then after he passed away, there was this whole dynamic shift, this like the power structure shifted. And I think that his mistress, who ended up taking over the cult, and her side piece, who took it over with her, were afraid of losing his authority, like the authority that the cult leader had. So they started hearing from him from beyond the grave. They were like, he's not dead. We can still hear from him. So they started hearing from him, and then WS came out with this whole series of GNs, or Good Newses. If you haven't seen the intro series, go ahead and hop on back, learn about WS. But WS came up with this series called Who Said They're Dead? And the whole series was full of prophecies from dead celebrities and talking about how like, we're not dead, we're still alive in heaven, and we want to talk to you guys because you're like David's end time army. So we heard from Richard Nixon, who was in heaven, obviously. We heard from Elvis, of course, and we also heard from Marilyn Monroe, who told all the men in the cult that she would be ready for them when they got to heaven. She was very excited to be of service to the Lord's end time army. So we also later ended up hearing from Bojangles, and the prophecy from him was received in Ebonics. So clearly that tells you about the intelligence level of the people receiving these prophecies from these deceased celebrities. Anyways, one of the celebrities that they heard from beyond the veil, was Priscilla Presley. And Priscilla Presley is still alive. And I will tell you how they explained that one away. So, their whole explanation is that time is a human construct, and we don't understand what God is like. God is not constricted to time. So actually, this prophecy is from Priscilla Presley at a later time, after she's passed away and in heaven and speaking to us. But what she had to say was really important for us to hear now. So what God did is he broke through the time, like the time-space continuum, and he allowed us to hear from Priscilla Presley after she's lived out her life and deceased and gone to heaven, and he really needed to give us this message. For some reason, that was the only time that the Lord kind of manipulated the time-space continuum in order for us to receive a prophecy from Priscilla Presley, because after we found out that she was still alive, for some reason, that sort of permission to break the time thing stopped. So there you go. Anyways, so after that whole thing, they were like, they would still receive prophecies from the leader. That way they would use his voice and his authoritarian voice to really try and keep control of the cult. And then they started hearing from Jesus a lot more. And then they started inviting everybody to start cultivating this relationship with Jesus, because initially it was like just the leaders who heard from the Lord. And then they were like, no, everybody should start hearing from the Lord. Everyone should cultivate this relationship with Jesus. So what they did is they would ask everyone to have like word time, which was where we would read cult literature, and then it was like prayer time where you would pray for 30 minutes, and then it was a time for prophecy where you would sit down and try and hear from the Lord. Around the year 2000, they were like, okay, everybody needs to really try and get in touch with the Lord, because after the year 2000, the spiritual warfare is going to get so much more intense. The devil is really going to start attacking. So everybody needs to hear from him before Y2K. So I remember January 31st, 1999. No, December 31st, thank you. 1999. I remember doing that. I remember like having my word time, reading like memory book verses, and then like really praying for the Lord to help me receive the thing that He wanted me to hear. And then going up into my room and just being like, okay, can I hear from the Lord? And I got something from Jesus being like, good for you. I'm glad that you pierced the veil before the spiritual warfare got tough. And I was like, thank you, Jesus. And really, what it ended up evolving into, they had this whole thing called Ask Me Everything. And it was from Jesus. It was a series of GNs, again, from Jesus. And GNs is what, when WS would put out new literature, they called it GNs, and GN stood for good news. So every time we would get literature from like cult headquarters, it was supposed to be good news. So they had this whole series of GNs called Ask Me Everything, and it was from Jesus saying how He wanted to be involved in every aspect of our life, and we needed to check in with Him for everything that we did. And what that ended up as is, I remember once wanting to watch a movie, and this was in the last commune that I was in, so I must have been like 19, and I remember I wanted to watch a movie, and I went to the leader of the commune and I was like, hey, can I watch this movie? And they're like, well, you need to hear from Jesus and see what He has to say, but since you're not trustworthy, you also need to ask one of like somebody else in the home to also ask him the same question. And both of your questions need to be met with the same answer. And then both of you need to post your prophecies from Jesus on the fridge, and then you can watch the movie. So it was little things like that. And I remember, if I ever wanted to leave the house, it would be like, first of all, why am I leaving the house? Secondly, what did Jesus say about it? Secondly, somebody needs to confirm that my channel is clear and I'm allowed to leave the house for this reason. And then we need to take that and present it to the leaders or paste it somewhere where everybody can see it. That way everybody knows what you're doing all of the time. So you had to have an excuse or a reason to do every single thing. And if anything ever happened, say for example, I got a prophecy that I should take the red car, and I confirmed through another friend that yes, Jesus said we should take the red car. So we get in and we take the red car to the store, and on the way back we get a flat. Then we call someone to come out, they change the tire, we make it home. When we get home and we say, hey, we got a flat tire, then it's like, okay, well, clearly you, like whoever got the prophecy that we were allowed to take the red car, has a bad channel, and like we can't be trusted, and now we need united prayer, and we need to think about the things that we did wrong in our life that ended up with us being like having a flat tire on the side of the road. So every event that happened was not a life event. It was either a like confirmation or denial of you having a clear channel, and you were never allowed to receive anything in prophecy from your own personal channel that contradicted the channel of somebody above you, somebody in a leadership position or anything like that. And they would use this obviously to manipulate people. I once had somebody come up to me and tell me that they heard from Jesus, that Jesus had told them that they were allowed to have sex with me. And I was like, I disagree. And they were like, well, why don't you hear from Jesus about it? Because according to my conditioning, I'm not allowed to receive a no, because I am an object and I'm a vessel for service for men. And so I was supposed to receive a yes from Jesus. But my prayer to Jesus was, Jesus, it's a no. And like, I appreciate you, Jesus. I appreciate you dying on the cross, but I am not going to have sex with this man. And later on, he came up to me and he was like, hey, what did Jesus say? Because he knew that I was supposed to say yes. And I was like, oh, Jesus said no. And he got super upset and he demanded to see the prophecy that I got. And he demanded that like somebody else has to get the same confirmation. Otherwise, I clearly have a bad channel because I'm not receiving what I am supposed to be receiving. And I was just like, well, the communication that between Jesus and I is up to me. So like, no, you can't see the prophecy because that's like a love letter from Jesus to me, but you just need to trust what I'm saying. And it's a no. And it ended up being this whole thing. But thankfully, long story short, I did not have to have sex with him. But there were a lot of times like that was a very lucky scenario for me. And I know that a lot of people were very much coerced, manipulated, and degraded into all sorts of situations because of this whole prophecy thing. So any attempt that they give you at autonomy is just, it always ends up as another way for them to take more things away from you. So that is what prophecy was for them. And they got a lot of prophecies from all sorts of people. And as much as they encouraged autonomy and hearing from the Lord, again, because it was never allowed to contradict with cult literature or anything that the leader wanted, it just ended up being another way for them to control the situation. And that is what prophecy was all about for them. And shout out to Priscilla Presley for being the one person who is still alive that was able to say something so important that God was willing to shift the time-space continuum and allow her to say something very important to the Lord's end-time army. And that's my story.